that. They do a psychological, even psychic sort of biopsy, and they will know whether you will go along with the secrecy. If you will, they'll give you little bits of it and bring you along and bring you along and bring you along. And if they think you won't, they're not going to tell you, because if they do, they know they're going to have to do something to silence you. So it protects good people from knowing, who are in high positions. Think about it. It's self-protective to everyone, except the planet and us. So psychologically, this is a very complex issue, but institutionally, it's even more complex, because people will think that, well, it's got to be this agency. It's the agency that has this. And there's no the agency. It's like a guy I was talking to about a senator who was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, kvetching about the fact that he had seen some stuff to make him think this stuff was really going on, but he had no information, and we made an inquiry. He was blown off. It was a sitting Senate Intelligence Committee member that I met with. And I mentioned this to a guy that I know who's a corporate guy who had been with Lockheed. And he says, oh, well, the tank those guys go into is the wrong tank. He'd have been better off on the 7th floor of the Xerox building over here in the suburbs of D.C. Anyway, so the fact of the matter is, this thing is wrapped up in a very unusual way, and it's how you keep it secret. Now, the myth in the media is that, well, they can't keep a secret. They couldn't even keep Bill Clinton's affair secret. Well, the fact is that it's all relative. You know about it. I know about it. There are millions of people who do. One of the biggest things that people want to see on the internet and in the media are issues related to this subject. Anyways, I was on Larry King Live years ago when they did a show on this. His producer said it was the highest ratings they had ever had, ever. So you can't tell me, even from a money whore point of view of the media, they're all shills for either money or something, that there's not interest in this. There is if it's done well, and you keep it out of the silly season of, whatever. I think that the problem is that we have lost all of our major institutions on this subject, which includes the national security, infiltration, and corruption in the corporate world for the media, where the media has become the chief roadblock to the secrecy. It has. And I was meeting with a congressman last month, in February. What is this? It's April. And I was flying back with him from someplace, and we were sitting for a couple hours talking. And this congressman is on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And he knows that I'm trying to identify new energy systems that are based on zero-point energy and electrogravitic and so-called anti-gravity systems to bring out to the public. We're not trying to rip off the black projects. We're trying to find scientists out here who understand this stuff or don't have a screw loose and can actually build something. We're still waiting. Right? We're getting close. We're going to see. And this guy was saying to me, he said, well, it's the media. The media is absolutely not free anyway. He knew this as a congressman. He says the media spins everything. And you can see it happen on a political issue. You can see it happen on a technology issue. You can see it happen on this kind of issue. Years ago, I met with a man who was the national security military affairs guy for the Washington Post. And he said to me, and we were having a drink at a place in D.C., some place that you'd never think we'd be, basically. And he turned to me and he said, well, I've got a whole file on some stuff like this, including the fact that there's been human cloning going on in covert military and corporate programs in facilities that are underground out west. I said, yeah, I know about those. I said, you know about the ones that make it look like they're ETs and they're not anyway? He said, oh, yeah. I said, well, why don't you run with that story? He says, Dr. Greer, you know nothing important is ever printed in the Washington Post. Now, by important, he didn't mean, who gave who a sexual favor in the Oval Office. I mean, that'll be front page for 390 days. Or, 10% cut on the Medicare thing or this thing or that, some trivial issue. Even a conventional war issue. You'll hear the conventional part. But they will not tell you about these issues. And if they try to, read the book, Into the Buzzsaw. Gore Vidal wrote the introduction to it, where he talks about journalists who came across incredible stories, and they were true, and they were just completely kicked out of their media organizations or worse. So The fourth estate is dead. Back in 1994 or 5, I was at a place in New York City with kind of the New York 100. You know, Laura Rockefeller was there, and Mrs. Boutros-Ghali, the wife of the Secretary General, was there. And Bob Schwartz was there. And Bob Schwartz is a media guy who had been on the board of Time Life. And he told me point blank, he says, the media has become scribes sitting at the right hand of the king taking dictation. And we don't have a fourth estate. Not really. Not on anything this important. Because he had found documents, some that, I don't know if Bob and Ryan Wood are here, but some of the ones related to the so-called MJ-12 group and the covert groups dealing with this, and had handed it off to a major journalist that he's friends with at 60 Minutes at CBS. And they wouldn't let him run with the story. A lot of people said, you know, given the huge number of people who were following this Disclosure Project event in 2001, why didn't any of these other news magazines pick this up and run with it? I said, well, they tried to. I mean, one of the executive producers of ABC News was at my farm out here in Virginia, going through every file I have, and a lot of it's triple hot. I mean, I've had guys just flat out take things out of projects and give them to me, not declassified. And, you know, he was going to run with this stuff. And about a couple weeks after the May event in 2001, he called me and he says, well, you know, doesn't look like we're going to get this on. I said, oh? I said, why not? He said, oh, well, they won't let me. I said, I thought you said you were totally in charge of Primetime Live in 2020. You could put on whatever you wanted. He says, well, apparently not. So, look, the corruption is enormous. So it's up to us. Here, the beauty of the internet is that if you can keep your nose clean and stick with the facts, and if you look at what we put together with the Disclosure Project, on any particular section, there's not just 1 or 2 witnesses, there's usually 3 or 6 or 10 or 5, you know, corroborating the kind of things that were going on with, you know, UFOs being concerned about our nuclear weapons, or air traffic control, military chase them, or NORAD being involved when they deny that they are, et cetera and so on. But if you can keep your nose clean and put the facts out there, people want to know the truth. Now, I always tell people that they may not like what they hear initially. It's like Brian O'Leary used to say to me, the Apollo astronaut and really interesting guy, done a lot with New Energy. He said, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And I said, yeah, you're right. Sometimes that's true, but we have got to come out of childhood's arrest here. We're in an adolescent arrest as a civilization. We have got to evolve to the place where spiritually and socially we can live peacefully enough to let these technologies run our planet safely. Now, make no mistake about it. Can these technologies be weaponized? Yeah. You know, the #1 violent crime death I saw in the ER wasn't guns, it was knives. I saw more people sliced and diced and stabbed, even kids in high school. So it's anything. I can turn this into a weapon. You know, I mean, you can weaponize anything. And this begs a larger question. Are we ready as a civilization to say no to the weaponization of all these technologies, which, by the way, has already happened, and put together an international resolve to live together peacefully so that the planet can move forward without killing it? Right now we're in this death grip. It's sort of a catch-22. The technologies are being kept back for both greedy reasons and some legitimate ones related to weaponization. And the Earth is spinning out of control more and more into terrorism and anarchy and chaos and environmental collapse because the technologies are still secret. And it builds more and more poverty in war, more and more injustice. And if there's injustice and disparity, there will be violence eventually. And we're going to see more of it. So how do you break this? Well, you're going to have to get some wise people together. And several good friends of the Dalai Lama are on my advisory group. And we'd had very open discussions about what's going to be needed spiritually, institutionally, and otherwise to put together to bring these things out safely and create a world that we can leave to our children and our grandchildren that will actually be here and intact. We can do it. And we're, by the way, at V1. You know V1, you're going down the run. How many pilots are there here? You know, V1 is when you got to either shut it down or take off, because if you go much further, you're going to hit the end of the runway, you know, before you can stop the jet. So our civilization's at V1. We got to rotate up, out. And if we don't, it will crash. The system will crash. We're straining the biosphere. We're straining the political structure. The asymmetric threat of terrorism will only get worse the longer we have to stay over in that part of the world trying to keep this line of super tankers supplying